as well as on our social media platforms, Facebook and YouTube. I'm Sablor Lama, and I'm here with the English news for the hour. Spokesperson for UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Liz Throssell warns Ethiopian authorities that failed to respect principles of distinctions amount to war crimes. The spokesperson said that the airstrikes had killed 21 civilians just this week and referred to last week's attacks on an IDP camp in Dadabit, the deadliest yet. Mironiman has more on this.
The High Commissioner for Human Rights gave a briefing on Friday regarding airstrikes targeting civilians across Tigray. Liz Throssell, spokesperson for the High Commissioner, said that 21 civilians had been killed this week alone and more than 41 injured, and highlighted that many of the victims were women. The airstrike took place on Monday and Tuesday in a flour mill in Maitauri, northwestern Tigray, where people had gathered to grind their mill, and a technical vocational education training institute in Atzvi, just a few kilometers from Mala. The spokesperson for the commissioner also called the airstrike on an IDP camp in Dadawit in northwestern Tigray the most deadliest, claiming the lives of 59 people and injuring many. Throssell also emphasized that several other airstrikes in northwestern Tigray caused many casualties, including a private minibus traveling from Arit to Aksum, in Shura and Ma'aini refugee camps. The spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights called on Ethiopian authorities and their allies to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian property in line with their obligation under international law, and emphasized that failure to respect the principles of distinction and proportionality amount to war crimes. The spokesperson also emphasized on mass detention and arbitrary detention of thousands of Tigrayans across Ethiopia, and called on Ethiopian authorities to bring to an immediate end of the indefinite detention of prisoners in appalling conditions, and without being brought before a court of law or other tribunal review the reasons for their detention, among other violations of procedural guarantees.
Tigray's Bureau of Labor and Social Affairs held a press conference on Friday discussing the humanitarian catastrophe in Tigray. The Bureau stated that internally displaced persons are leaving IDP camps out of fear of aerial bombardments and lack of food and medical supplies. There are currently over 2.2 million internally displaced persons, all in need of emergency food assistance that is currently unavailable due to the 6-month-long siege on Tigray that has blocked off all food aid, medical supplies, and banking services.
Tigray Bureau of Labor and Social Affairs, BOLSA, held a press conference on Friday and announced that the humanitarian crisis in Tigray has reached its summit due to the series of drone attacks and blockade of humanitarian aid into Tigray. During the press conference, interim head of the Bureau, Mr. Mulgeta Debalko, emphasized that over 2.2 million IDPs and others who are victims of the war are in a dire situation as food aid and medical supply has been totally halted due to the siege. Mr. Mulgeta stressed that the people of Tigray at large have currently found themselves in a severe humanitarian crisis as time passes.
ዓለም ለ6.2 ሚሊዮን ተጋሩ ክሕግዝ ሬዲ ኮይኑ ናሃለ ብሰንኪ ብሎኬጅ
The world has shown its willingness to reach out for 6.2 million Tigrayans. However, the blockade has prevented it from entering Tigray. More than 100,000 households in Tigray live now at the verge of death. Over 100,000 gender-based violence survivors who are physically and psychologically damaged are found in Tigray. To make things worse, there are elderly, chronic patients and lactating mothers who desperately need food, with no one to listen to their calls.
Mr. Mulgeta further highlighted that his bureau is forced to let the IDPs return back to their vicinities, except for those from western Tigray, further underscoring that all possible support mechanisms have been exhausted as food aid discontinued in the region. He added that the IDPs heavily relied on Maqala residents for their daily bread. However, now the residents have reached a point where they can no longer reach out with a helping hand as the siege's ripple effect has damaged everyone's economy to its foundation. Mr. Mulgeta said that the IDPs are returning back home with the hope that the Bureau will distribute aid to their vicinities whenever aid agents are allowed to resume their humanitarian works.
When we decided to return the IDPs home, we understand that they will face serious problems. Their homes are destroyed and left without doors. Their possessions looted and the economy is damaged. But we have no choice. We have documented biometric data of the IDPs and we will reach out for them when aid agencies resume their humanitarian work. Keeping them in cities will be worse than their return.
Mr. Mulgeta also pointed out that the invaders have looted and vandalized everything possessed by Tigrayans with a premeditated intention of exterminating the people of Tigray. Consequently, more than 5.2 million people are in desperate need of food aid and other forms of life-saving assistance. Mr. Mulgeta warned that tragedy will unfold shortly after unless the international community takes an action beyond rhetoric condemnation to reach out to those in desperate need with the necessary humanitarian assistance.
ማለት ድሕሪ ህዚ ሓንቲ ነገር እንድሕር ዘይተኸይደ ኣብ ወርሒ ትራጀዲ ክረአ ይኽእል እዩ ብትግራይ
As of now, unless immediate and pragmatic measures are taken, we will be forced to witness tragedy within a month. This has already begun. The situation has now reached its summit. It is a matter of a month or two before a holocaust be forced to the people of Tigray. Everything has become a matter of life and days. Famine gives no time. It claims the lives of millions all at once.
The interim head urged that the world should go beyond rhetoric condemnation. Concerns won't stop from pushing the people of Tigray into the edge of extinction.
The White House State Department released a statement on Friday that newly appointed U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, David Satterfield, is set to visit Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Ethiopia amid crisis in Ethiopia and Sudan. According to the report, David Satterfield and Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Molly Fee, will travel to Riyadh, Khartoum, and Addis Ababa on January 17 to 20. The report also highlighted that the pair will talk with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to seek a resolution for the deepening civil war in Ethiopia. Abraga Britansay has more on this.
The White House State Department released a statement on Friday that David Satterfield, newly appointed U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, and Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Molly Fee, will visit Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Ethiopia from January 17 to 20. Assistant Secretary Fee and Special Envoy Satterfield will travel to Addis Ababa for a day visit where they are expected to have talks with Abiy Ahmed to seek a resolution to the deepening civil war in Ethiopia. The statement underscored that the talk with Prime Minister Abiy will reinforce President Biden's telephone conversation with Abiy Ahmed earlier this week to seize the opportunity for peace. It is to be recalled that the government of Tigray has withdrawn all its forces from neighboring regions in an effort to encourage peaceful talks. Assistant Secretary Fee and Special Envoy Satterfield will also ask for the establishment of a ceasefire, the release of political prisoners, and the restoration of humanitarian access to all parts of Ethiopia. This is Satterfield's first visit to the region following his appointment as Special Envoy after Jeffrey Feltman's resignation earlier this month. Jeffrey Feltman has also been calling for a ceasefire to the warring parties in Tigray, and he called the retreatment of Tigrayan forces from neighboring Afar and Amhara regions as an opportunity to stop the war and start a political process towards restoring peace in Ethiopia, while he stressed that the ball was now in the court of the Ethiopian government as the Tigrayan forces have already directed a written commitment to the UN Secretary General, mentioning their readiness for political dialogue. It is to be recalled that President Biden expressed concern to Abiy Ahmed on telephone calls that the ongoing hostilities, including recent airstrikes, continue to cause civilian casualties and suffering, and stated his government's commitment to work alongside the African Union and regional partners to help Ethiopians peacefully resolve the conflict.
On Thursday, the chair of the Nobel Committee, Berit Rees Anderson, said that Abiy Ahmed, as a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, bears special responsibility to end the bloodshed in Tigray. But Abiy receiving the prized award was always contested, especially by Ethiopian and Eritrean citizens that argued that peace pact had a very little on paper and didn't seem to normalize relations in bordering areas. So while the Nobel Committee says Abiy Ahmed bears special responsibility to end the conflict, our reporter Salome Takhleh asks who should bear responsibility for emboldening him. Salome Takhleh.
The Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Abiy Ahmed in 2019 for what the Nobel Committee referred to as his contribution to the peace agreement with Eritrea and his comprehensive political initiative for democracy and the development of civil rights. In his acceptance speech, Abiy Ahmed would tell the audience that war is the epitome of hell.
War is the epitome of hell for all involved. I know because I have been there and back. I have seen brothers slaughtering brothers on the battlefield. I have seen older men, women and children trembling in terror under the deadly shower of bullets and artillery shells. You see, I was not only a combatant in war, I was also a witness to its cruelty and what it can do to people. War makes for bitter men, heartless and savage men.
But less than a year later, Abiy Ahmed, in alliance with the Eritrean president Isaias Afwerki, would launch a devastating war on the people of Tigray, calling it a law enforcement operation that he said would only take few days. During the 8 months long occupation of Tigray by the allied forces of both governments, all kinds of atrocities ranging from gang rape to arbitrary and mass killing of Tigrayan civilians were committed. The war that saw the killing of thousands of Tigrayans has also forced millions to be internally displaced and thousands to flee to the neighboring Sudan. Even after the forced retreat of the Ethiopian and Eritrean forces from most parts of Tigray, the Ethiopian government has put Tigray in an all-encompassing siege that has blocked the delivery of all essential items, including food and medical supplies. A catastrophe all caused by a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. But for those that had cared to listen, Abiy Ahmed's so-called attempts at bringing peace were always questionable. Not only was the peace agreement unclear and the effort at normalization completely non-existent, but had already appeared to be empowering Isaias Afwerki, a man almost solely responsible for the decay of a promising East African nation. Eritrean activist Benassa Tsahaye would publish an article in the days following Abiy Ahmed's award, emphasizing that the peace deal had very little impact on the ordinary life of Eritreans and Ethiopians. Borders remained closed and indefinite national services had continued in Eritrea. The New York Times, in an article it named "The Nobel Peace Prize That Paved the Way for War," stated how the Nobel Peace Prize had emboldened Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki to plot a war against Tigray. The article that mentioned how Abiy Ahmed has been preparing for the war and mobilizing troops towards Tigray well ahead of November 2020 highlighted how the Peace Prize has paved Abiy Ahmed the way to war. But this is not the first time that the Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to people whose recognition was later considered to be unworthy. The Nobel Peace Prize winner of the 1991 Aung San Suu Kyi, who led Myanmar as a state counselor for years but was overthrown by a military coup in 2021, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize as an outstanding example of the power of the powerless. The leadership of this Nobel Peace Prize winner, who was once seen as a human rights icon, was defined by the way that the country's mostly Muslim Rohingya minority were treated. In the Rohingya genocide, Muslims of the Rohingya minority were persecuted, killed, raped, and abused by the Myanmar military. The crisis had forced the Rohingya people to flee into neighboring countries like Bangladesh, as the troops were burning their villages, killing and raping them. San Suu Kyi was criticized for inaction and silence over the issue by several bodies including the United Nations, human rights groups, and the US State Department. Myanmar now faces lawsuit for genocide against Rohingya people by the International Court of Justice, while International Court of Crimes is investigating the country for crimes against humanity. Juan Manuel Santos, who was the president of Colombia then, was awarded the prize in 2016 for his efforts to end the 50-years-long civil war in his country. But days after he was awarded the prize, the Colombians rejected the peace agreement in referendum. While there is no statute for revoking the prize, Professor of Peace and Conflict Shetel Tronvol says that members of the committee can take individual responsibility for awarding the 2019 prize to Abiy Ahmed. The members should thus collectively resign their honorable positions at the Nobel Committee in protest and defiance. However late, the much criticized institution has begun pointing its fingers at the very man it called Peace Laureate. The Nobel panel that awards Nobel Peace Prize said on Thursday that Abiy Ahmed bears special responsibility to end the ongoing bloodshed in Tigray, having witnessed the devastation and humanitarian crisis he and his troops have caused in the region. If the award Abiy Ahmed received for making peace emboldens him to start a war, the question should not be if anyone should take responsibility, but who and how. Can you imagine a day without food? Can you imagine a place with no medication? Imagine one day you have no access to your savings you've been depositing for years. Imagine not having a salary for 6 months. Could you imagine if all roads leading home were blocked? Could you imagine all this in darkness? Could you imagine being bombarded every day? And all while a complete communication blackout makes it impossible for you to tell your story? Could you imagine living like this for a day, for a week, a month, 6 months? Could you imagine?
During their stay in Tigray, Ethiopian forces and their allies have burned crops, looted and destroyed infrastructures, and left many to starve to death. The 7-month-long siege that followed has made survival very difficult, and many are dying as a result. Dr. Tedros Adhanom, the Director General of the World Health Organization, says that the conflict in Ethiopia should be resolved constitutionally as humanitarian situations grows more dire day by day. We have a report on this. Before the advent of Abiy Ahmed into power, Ethiopia has been one of the fastest growing countries in the world, achieving double-digit growth annually and at the center of efforts to establish peace and security in the Horn. 3 years into Abiy Ahmed's governance, the situation has been completely changed. International bodies now say Ethiopia's economic prospects are impossible to predict, while the country is embroiled in a deadly civil war, while analysts and international media outlets have called what is unfolding genocide. Dr. Tedros Adhanom, Director General for the World Health Organization, says that the conflict should be resolved politically and that respect for the constitution should result in a peaceful resolution to the conflict.
This thing should be resolved politically, peacefully. If there is a commitment to resolve it peacefully, there is a way. There is a way to resolve it peacefully and politically. And we know that just respecting the constitutional order, the Constitution, would bring this problem into a peaceful conclusion. And the most courageous choose peace. So ultimately, it's a political solution or peace, which is the answer.
The destruction of infrastructures and looting of public and private properties have caused horrifying outcomes. It caused more than 2 million to be internally displaced, while more than 70,000 fled to Sudan. And more than 6.3 million people are in dire need of humanitarian assistance and 1 million in famine-like conditions. Dr. Tedros mentioned how serious this situation is and called it hell-like situation. He also added that there needs to be unrestricted access to Tigray in order to save lives, and that WHO is deeply concerned that the Ethiopian government is denying its people food and medication for more than a year.
The situation is serious. Nowhere in the world you would find a crisis like what you see in the northern part of Ethiopia, especially in Tigray. None. No, nowhere in the world are we witnessing hell like in Tigray. And the international community has to do everything. The basics is to have unfettered access, whether it's food or medicine. Humanitarian access should be allowed at all times, even during conflict. Even conflict cannot be an excuse, because we're delivering medicine in conflict areas while the conflict is raging. So that place cannot be different. But as I speak now, we're deeply concerned from WHO side. We have tried all our best, but we're blocked from sending medicines to Tigray, Ethiopia. And that's so dreadful and unimaginable during this time, 21st century, when a government is denying its own people for more than a year food and medicine and the rest to survive.
It is to be recalled that the government of Tigray has been calling for a peaceful resolution of the conflict and has withdrawn its forces from neighboring regions Amhara and Afar to facilitate an inclusive dialogue. However, according to the UN, Ethiopian government has continued to bombard urban settings in Tigray, killing dozens of civilians this week alone, and launching its most deadliest attack last week on an IDP camp in northwestern Tigray, killing 59 IDPs. The systematic destruction of health facilities has been a major feature of the genocidal crimes committed in Tigray. Ethiopian and Eritrean forces destroyed almost all health facilities in rural areas, while the siege has made it impossible for the health system to revive. Now, doctors at Maqala hospitals say that they are being forced to reuse even the most basic equipments, including gloves. Aragay Gabra Mikhail reports.
The gynecology center at Mekelle Hospital is currently faced with a devastating depletion of medical supplies. The gynecologists, whose nature of their jobs expose them to direct blood contact in their everyday activities against all odds, are forced to reuse gloves by simply washing them off. Hadas Oldeslassie is a coordinator of the gynecology center at Mekelle Hospital, who describes the situation as follows.
نحن سرحنا يا عديتات مولادي. حزن عديتات نهولو قلقالت من نقر يلي.
Our job is delivering mothers, but we have nothing at hand to help them. We are running out of medical supplies, and lack of medical gloves has reached its limit. So we are forced to reuse them by washing them off. We are forced to do this out of desperation. But there are also other things like gauze that we can't reuse, even if we could wash them. We don't even have medical supplies for blood clotting that are crucial to clot excessive bleeding of the mother.
The chief executive manager of Mekelle Hospital, Dr. Philemon Masfen, stated that a circular letter has been written to all health facilities in Tigray from Tigray Bureau of Health on the depletion of medical supplies and to reuse gloves in order to alleviate the matter.
As of 1 month ago, the Regional Health Bureau has already distributed a letter to reuse surgical gloves, which by far I haven't seen in my life. But you can imagine how the siege and blockage is contributing to this kind of decisions. So as of last month, we have already accepted the letter, and as of this week, we are already on our way to reuse surgical gloves. We collect them. Of course, there are procedures to reuse. It's not a standard qualified project, but it was done. It was research done in IDER, so it's somehow effective rather than having nothing. You can reuse the surgical gloves. This is a good example to what Tigray is going on right now.
Tadamka Mengistu has been working as a gynecologist in Mekelle Hospital. He stated that this solution is the only option left.
We are forced to reuse gloves as we have no other options left. Though this is the worst case scenario, we have to do it in order to save lives. There is no way we can carry out the procedure with our bare hands. Even though medical ethics dictates otherwise, this is the only thing we are able to do in these desperate times.
Tatamka Mengistu also says that the existing problem of the hospital is multifaceted. Besides to the depletion of medical supplies, mothers are suffering from communication outage, unavailability of transportation, and lack of money in times of labor.
Transport እንዳለ ኮይኑ ambulance service zero ምንም የለም.
There is no service of transportation due to the ongoing siege, and on the top of that there is a communication blockout. As a result, mothers are forced to walk on foot in times of labor to get to the hospital. There are also many who die in their homes due to excessive bleeding, and there are those who are exposed to fistula. So we have to wash the gloves to treat mothers out of desperation.
Sister Hadas Oldeslassie calls all Ethiopian mothers to understand that their situation Tigrayan mothers are living in. She said that this has nothing to do with politics but humanity.
I ask all Ethiopian mothers to look into our lives and the situation into which Tigrayan mothers have fallen. Of course, such issues cannot be broadcasted through Ethiopian media outlets, but this is the truth. Tigrayan mothers have fallen victim to such devastating situation. So Ethiopian mothers, your views should not be clouded by politics, and you should open your eyes to look to the lack of medical supplies that is killing Tigrayan mothers.
As most of the healthcare system in Tigray has been destroyed, people are dying of lack of medical supplies. Unless the international community manages to go beyond rhetoric condemnation, the situation is going to get even worse.
The all-encompassing siege on Tigray has put millions in crisis, including civil servants that have not received their salaries for 7 months and are unable to access their savings due to the discontinuation of banking services. We spoke to civil servants in Mekelle that say they're not able to access even the most basic items. Haile Gabru has the details.
As an extension to the genocidal war waged in Tigray, Abiy Ahmed's government has continued to use man-made famine as a weapon of war by blocking all the roads and disconnecting communication accesses to Tigray. As a result, many lives are under precarious conditions. Tigrayan civil servants, who are now suffering from the all-encompassing siege, expressed their grave concerns about the intensified famine in Tigray.
Though we are civil servants, we couldn't get anything yet. We used to make a living through our monthly salary, and several of our family members depended on our income. However, we are now in such a desperate situation that we can't provide for ourselves, let alone for our family. Following the blockade, many of our staff members have gotten sick from malnutrition and lack of medication. How on earth does a government betray its own citizens like this?
It's been 7 months now since our salary has been cut off by the orders of the federal government. Imagine how hard it is to live without money even for a single week. We're only alive by the will of God. The Ethiopian government is committing unspeakable tragedies against its own civil servants.
Civil servants are now at a critical condition where leading life has become an extreme challenge. We can't think of paying house rent in a situation where we have nothing to eat at home. We used to afford 3 meals a day, but now we are in a difficulty of affording for just a single meal. We are going through an excruciating experience.
Now, the siege around Tigray kept on worsening the situation. Civil servants and their family members have fallen victim to the horrible situation they are faced with. They express their views to Tigray television that Abiy Ahmed's government and his allies are using man-made famine as a weapon of war to compensate for their battlefield loss.
There's an absolute hopelessness. Their intention is to destroy Tigrayans both with bullets and hunger. Had the Ethiopian government truly believed that we are its citizens, we wouldn't have suffered in such a way. It's really unfortunate.
The federal government of Ethiopia has been carrying out atrocious crimes in Tigray by blocking all accesses to internet, bank, and other social services. We couldn't access our personal bank accounts because of the deliberate blockage by the government. Life is unendurable these days.
We used to use banks to save our money. However, now we can't withdraw and use it due to the blockade. There is no electricity, there is no job either. We are in a devastating situation. Abiy Ahmed's government is conspiring to exterminate Tigrayans using hunger and disease as a mass weapon.
Abiy Ahmed's government must be abided by the international humanitarian law and lift the siege, which has put the lives of millions of Tigrayans at risk. Moreover, the international and human rights community should put pressure on Abiy Ahmed's government for violating countless humanitarian laws.
The Tigray External Affairs Office issued a statement in response to a statement by Ethiopia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Thursday, claiming that the government of Tigray is responsible for blocking humanitarian aid coming into Tigray. The official called the allegations ludicrous and said the ministry has unfortunately been playing a negative role in spreading the divisive propaganda. The office called the allegation by the Ethiopian government a sick joke told at the expense of millions of Tigrayans who have been subjected to a cruel, inhumane, and morally repugnant blockade for the past 6 months. The Tigray External Affairs Office statement also said that thousands of civilians are killed due to the indiscriminate bombings and drone strikes against civilians and civilian infrastructure since mid-October 2021. According to the statement, instead of finding the solution in good faith, the criminal Abiy's regime is busying itself in manufacturing narratives to evade accountability for using hunger as a tool of war, a war crime under international law. The statement affirms that the international community must insist on unfettered humanitarian access by deploying a robust package of punitive action or the credible threat of such action